I would like to invite our next speaker. The governor, in his words, already gave the best possible introduction, so I won't add a word to it. With you, the former chairman of the board and president of the Government Development Bank, Carlos Garcia.
Well, good morning to all of you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your trust, and thank you for this great opportunity to have been able to serve for you and to serve for the people of Puerto Rico. Thank you to all my colleagues at the Government Development Bank and cabinet members, and especially to all of you for entrusting us with this significant endeavor that we have overtaken over these 27 months. It is a pleasure to be able to address you this morning in a presentation that we have titled Redefining Fiscal Policy to Foster Economic Growth. It is basically what has been our reconstruction plan. I will try to give a broad context to what has happened in the last 27 months, and more important, and the reason why we're all here, to have some forward-looking presence into what this entails for Puerto Rico in the very near present and in the near future. First of all, and most importantly, it's very important to stress the transition that has been undergoing at the Government Development Bank. I mean, the most important part is that the leadership remains, and that the leadership will be a part of everything that we have been doing, that has been provided since the beginning by the unwielding leadership of our Governor Luis Fortuño. The team, the Chief of Staff, Marcos Rodriguez-Ema, will be the chairman, or is already the chairman of the board of the Government Development Bank, and supported by a very strong team with the Secretary of Treasury, Jesus Mendez, with the Director of the Office of Budget and Management, Juan Carlos Pavia, and the new GDB President, Juan Carlos Valle. As it is important to mention, the credentials are very strong. It's an experienced team. It's an experienced team that have been occupying many key positions. It's a team that knows everything that has been going on, and we have worked for the past almost 45 days, to be sure that we have an orderly and a smooth transition, so we can continue on and we don't lose even a breath. So basically, these are some of the credentials of the group. We have a former GDB president with practically a year-and-a-half term on their prior administration, serving together with the governor. Juan Carlos Valle, a very experienced person, both on the investment banking side, knows the GDB also inside out. Jose Otero, who has been working at the governor's office in several posts, also a very key component in charge of the financing activities of the bank. Jesus Mendez, who has had also a distinguished career working both at the Puerto Rico Public Buildings Authority and at the GDB, taking the helm of the Treasury Department. And most importantly, especially at the time that we are, making sure that we control expenses and knowing what that is, as having been Executive Director of the Fiscal Reconstruction Board, Juan Carlos Pavia, at the helm of the Office of Budget and Management. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is redefining fiscal policy. Redefining fiscal policy means that you have a goal, and our governor has had a goal very clear since the beginning. And I want to share with you some of the principles that he stated as he was campaigning to become governor. We're going to awake the economic power of our private sector. Key emphasis. Put the government to work within its budgetary means and alleviate the punitive tax burden on our working class. This will be our first priorities and the principles in which we will base our government. These are basically the principles that were outlined by the governor with the platform. As you all know, what you face can change your plans, but it can never change your goals. And it is certainly one of the situations that we encountered at the beginning, that I will not bore you with all the details, but want to review it very quickly. Especially, there's a big red explosion there, which is called a government shutdown, which may sound familiar now at the national level. If you see what has happened to Puerto Rico in the past decade, basically the catalyst or the loss of momentum for Puerto Rico was the government shutdown. And as I hope it is not forgotten in Washington, it is not the political ramifications of a government shutdown or who wins or who loses, the Republicans or the Democrats. The key issue here is what happens to the economy, what happens to the confidence of the people, what happens to the things that lose track, what happens to the investments that are not made. It's not only the short-term effect. And I think Puerto Rico is probably the best example. If you see here, after that moment in time, we have undergone the worst part in our economy, since basically the Great Depression. We have had growth from the years 03 to 06 that was basically 7.2 percentage points. And we have lost in the last 4 years, almost 5 years, almost 12 percentage points. So basically this is our lost decade, something that should not happen and that will not happen to Puerto Rico again if we're able to learn from history, and something that we hope that we'll be taking into account on all the different discussions going now to the next 15 hours in terms of the federal government. Second item, as you look at as I was saying, you have a plan and you want to do certain things. You can change the way you execute it, but you cannot change your goals. But there were some very large hurdles that we have to overcome. The first one was the largest deficit, a $3.3 billion deficit that was in front of us. Second was, as we all know, Puerto Rico was also at the verge of becoming non-investment grade by two of the principal rating agencies, which obviously was putting a great burden not only on the plans that you want to execute, but also on your future plans. What we face and what we need to address this problem. I think the important thing of any plan is that you have to start right away. We have the opportunity to be able to do that with you on February of 2009, where we didn't have much else to say other than we have a plan and the problem is much larger than what we have to. But we did that with transparency, trying to communicate as much as we knew about the situation and trying to convey to you the confidence that we were going to take the necessary steps that we needed to be able to accomplish this task. But as I said, this started before even becoming in office. The governor had the opportunity and basically the mandate and responsibility to start working 60 days in advance to that by creating a special commission that created a plan or a base of a plan that at the end of the day became the reconstruction plan. We were able to plan with it. We were able to work together with the legislature to enact a plan that was doable. We worked very closely with the different commissions at both chambers of the legislature. We were fortunate to be able to work very hand in hand with the President of the House of Representatives Treasury Committee. Working hand in hand and working as a team allowed us to have that Fiscal Emergency Act. And when you have already the means to be able to do it, you have to be sure that you implement. We established a fiscal reconstruction board that was able to implement the significant savings, have to go through all the different ordeals to be able to carry out that forward. And now we're able to see some of that success, but remembering that we have to stay the course, being able to get the upgrades both from Moody's and from S&P and be able to move on. It was a very key ingredient as we look back into some of the actions that we're taking, the creation of a fiscal reconstruction board that basically put together a whole team of all the key agencies that had to work with this plan and make it work together to have that teamwork concept. And that was part of the reason for the creation of this fiscal reconstruction board that was, as I made up of all the 5 components of the government of Puerto Rico. How we cut government expenses. There's a list of different items. You start with all the small items. You start with showing with example. Governor led us with his example by cutting his salary by 10%, asking the agency head to do that by 5%. A 10% cut in all operating expenses, including official vehicles, cell phones, and credit cards. All the things that may not add up as much as you think to, but send the right message about the things that you have to do. A 30% reduction on the political job appointees. This was a significant commitment. This means having less resources to be able to do the same amount of work that you needed to do. Freezing all salaries and economic clauses in collective bargaining agreements for 2 years and putting very clear and strict regulations and laws to be able to implement that. A 15% cut in all contracts, both suppliers and also lease agreements. Shrinking the government by a significant amount and being able to reduce the amount that it was initially thought that it was needed, and also doing it in such a way that you minimize the effect on the services and you also minimize the effect on people. We were successful in reducing by less than half the amount of government employees that were part of the involuntary reductions by having successful voluntary programs that work in order to be able to achieve the savings. And most importantly, be able to maintain and close out some of the critical items which will be later discussed by the GDP President on the pension reform. Once you have your arms around the problem, how do you affect change? The first thing is the unyielding political commitment. And that unyielding political commitment can only come from the governor itself, and that was what happened with our plan. Second, the implementation of long-lasting transformational reforms requires leadership and teamwork between the executive and legislative power. We cannot underpin this. If you cannot work with your state legislatures, you cannot work hand in hand with your legislators, it is impossible to be able to execute and accomplish some of the success we have accomplished in the last 27 months. Third, focus on tackling competitive disadvantages while caring for socioeconomic issues. As you all know, it's very difficult to cut expenses and do the difficult things you have to do on the fiscal side, and don't be mindful about its effects on the economy and also on the services that you're providing to the people. And that was one of the challenges in balancing all this act. Finally, the tax burden reduction is the fastest way to implement economic income redistribution and capital deployment when you're in a deep recession. When you cannot issue more bonds, when you cannot cut more expenses, when you cannot tax more people, the only thing that you can do is to be able to combine the reductions that you can do with putting more money in the people's pockets. And finally, dare to do things differently and break with the establishment. If you continue to do things the way that everybody says that this is the way that we do it, you cannot change what we have, it is almost impossible to be able to implement a plan. After going through this brief explanation of what has happened, I think it is critical to share with you some of the underpinnings of the architecture of our economy. It is very important to understand where we're coming from. It is important to understand what we have done and how this leads into a new path. I've been surprised by architecture, and I'm not an architect, but an architecture needs to be mindful not only that the building looks beautiful and the air conditioner works, but also he needs to be mindful about all the practical items. Why does the shower cap goes there? Why does this go in this specific space? And it is very critical to be able to understand where our economy has been and where we're leading to. Puerto Rico, as we all know, entered a recessionary cycle before the mainland did. And it was part of the fiscal situation problems that we have. It was part of the government shutdown. It was part of overheating the economy. It was part of the overspending of many years. And it led us to where we are right now. It led us to probably one of the most difficult recessions that we have undergone in Puerto Rico. But finally, we're about to emerge. As the governor stated, for the fiscal year 2011, we're closing that gap significantly from the -2 and almost 4% of the last few years. And we're looking for the first time at having a positive economic growth on fiscal year 2012 that is just coming around the corner. When you look at our gross domestic product, it's very important to have certain specific distinctions. As you know, our manufacturing sector is the most important component of our economy. The manufacturing sector, when it's measured by the gross domestic product, it's basically 46%, followed by financial institutions, insurance, and real estate, which is the second largest sector. The third largest sector is services, and the fourth largest sector is the government. When you look at it from a gross state product perspective, basically taking out some of the components of the earnings and dividends that are repatriated out of Puerto Rico, you would see that the manufacturing sector, it is still a very important component, but it goes down from a 46% to a 25%. And this is important to understand these dynamics, because the dynamic is basically the gross state product is the product that stays in Puerto Rico. It's the product that generates jobs in Puerto Rico. It's the wealth that is retained in Puerto Rico. Second sector continues to be the insurance, financial institutions, and real estate, very important component. Third sector is services. Government goes down some significant, and then you see some of the diversification in the rest of the areas. As you would see, the difference is from $90 billion to $63 billion. And here you have the difference and the comparison. Basically, on the 70s, when the industrialization and the manufacturing growth started in Puerto Rico, we started to basically open this gap between the red line and the blue line, between the gross state product and the gross domestic product. And as you could see, that has continued to advance in terms of the growth of that difference, becoming a difference of basically $33 billion. If you look at Puerto Rico in comparison with all the states, you will see some of the contrast. There are obviously underpinnings in terms of the size of our informal economy, informal legal economy, in comparison to some of the rest of the states. But as you would see there, the difference in terms of the gross state product, Puerto Rico is basically half of the poorest state, which is Mississippi. It's 40% of Florida, which is basically our closest reference, and 23% of the richest state, which is Wyoming. When you look to our neighbors of the Caribbean, and when you look also to some of the principal countries in South America, you would see that the picture changes dramatically. I mean, you would see there that basically we are 3 times the size of the Dominican Republic, which is one of our closest neighbors, and we're basically 2 times larger than Venezuela and Brazil when you measure it in terms of income per capita. So it's important to understand those contracts when you're looking at the Puerto Rico economy. For years, Puerto Rico has relied on an economic model that has not evolved, as you have seen from some of the graphs, with no will to implement the necessary measures to change that course. If you look at the model for Puerto Rico for the last 30 years, it has been a model that has been basically driven by attracting successfully multinational investments in Puerto Rico, capturing some of that activity, but not benefiting into changing the economy and transforming the economy into taking that knowledge in order to close out that gap between the gross domestic product and the gross state product. The strategy that has been followed by the administration is diversification. All sectors are important, but we have to have a higher weighting in some of the other sectors. And that doesn't happen if you don't provide a lot of focus and also provide more resources, not just to providing incentives to certain particular sectors, but also to doing a redistribution and also to asking the private sector to grow with you in order to have a larger representation in our economy. If you look at one of the most serious publications that has happened in the last few years, on the year 2006, there was a book about the Puerto Rico economy, which is called Restoring Growth. And you have here a very telling statement about the Brookings Institution, which worked in this book together with the Center of the New Economy, which basically said, much of what is recorded as production in Puerto Rico is a simple paper transaction in which income is transferred to Puerto Rico and then taken back out as a dividend payments on mainland corporations. A detailed analysis conducted by the Brookings Institution revealed that from 1997 to 2001, the proportion of return on capital to workers' compensation in the chemical sector averaged in Puerto Rico 10.5 versus the mainland, which is 2.1. So that gives you an idea of why some of the decisions have been needed. To change a course, you have to change your strategy, and you must understand where every sector is in the economic cycle. So let's take a look at our economic cycle on the manufacturing side. We have gone on the 50s from sugar cane to the 70s to petrochemistry, on 90s to 2000 basically pharmaceuticals. Before that we have textiles on the 60s, and on the 80s electronics. Right now the key is based on the knowledge base, it's based on exports, and it is based on making the internal economy, on making the small and medium-sized business care be larger as it is in the mainland. And for that we have the new model for the new economy. If you look over the decades, you would see that we started with a significant component of food and apparel that started changing on the 60s. On the 70s, you'll see the introduction of the chemicals and the pharmaceuticals. That sector grew on the 80s, grew larger on the 90s, and now it has a very significant representation. If you look now at our manufacturing sector, 90% of it is comprised of pharmaceuticals and devices production. And out of that, chemicals is 60%, and out of that, 90%. So basically 50% of the overall pot is the pharmaceutical industry. When you look at it and you want to focus on industry, there are basically 3 key industries: pharmaceutical, electronics, and medical devices. When you look at what has happened to manufacturing and employment, and I think this is a call also at the national level, having a high rate of 35% for US multinational companies, what it has created is that basically in the last 2 decades, manufacturing jobs have been cut by half. And that has not happened only in Puerto Rico, it has happened also on the mainland. Basically a reduction in the US by 45% and a reduction in Puerto Rico by 50%. So it is important to recognize the trends. Obviously, some of these trends have to do with mechanization, some of these trends have to do with advancement, but also it has to do a lot with chipping of jobs outside of the US and outside of Puerto Rico. The reason for that being the high tax rate, and the reason for that being some of the competitive issues. When you look specifically at the pharmaceutical industry, it is important to understand what are the challenges that this industry is confronting at this point. First, there's a global contraction that has been occurring, and that is providing a negative trend just because of the expiration of different patents. You have here some of the largest and most significant pharmaceuticals, all of them which are operating here, and you will see there how their blockbuster drugs are expiring, and as you will see, most of these expirations are occurring between 2011 and 2014. So this is an important trend. I mean, it is an industry that needs to reinvent itself and that needs to make changes. Those changes have been attacked by some of the major multinationals by addressing the impeding reduction in revenues by implementing cost-cutting measures, which we have seen on the labor side, and also at looking for acquisitions with product development opportunities. So this industry has consolidated significantly, and this gives you an idea of what has happened on the cost-cutting and shutdown of different plants. And we have been not exempt from that, since 8 plants have shut down in the last 4 years. And this gives you an example of some of those, as it had happened in 2006, 2007, and a recent announcement by another one, or the largest manufacturing company here on 2010. Another key item to understand is one of the main reasons, or one of the significant factors why Puerto Rico has been able to factor this has been obviously the certainty provided to different tax decrees. But also it's important not to know the importance about that tax decree, which is very important, and that we have worked to be sure that we protect the manufacturing companies and that we protect these decrees. But it's important to understand some of the dynamics. As these companies evolve in their commitments of the tax decrees, you give them certainty for a period of 15 years, but you're basically getting commitment for a few years. So as things change, some of the compromise and the commitments that have been made start to change. And that has happened with a reduction of some of the employment commitments, and that basically trickles down by getting less for the amount of incentives that Puerto Rico is providing. When you look at the imbalance on the corporate sector in Puerto Rico, I think this is one of the most telling slides. When you look at a regular corporation in Puerto Rico before the tax reform that was enacted this year, the maximum tax rate was of 41%, which provided an effective tax rate of 34%, which was basically 20,000 companies, so basically all the companies. That contrasts with the exempt multinational companies that have a marginal rate of 0 to 4%, an effective tax rate of 1.4%, and even if you take into account the royalties, it's a 5% effective tax rate versus a 34% rate. So basically 7 times larger. And these are basically 58 companies. Obviously a very big important component, but it shows you that there needs to be a balance between these two numbers. And the number on the top is now 30%, being reduced on 2014 to 25%, and the effective tax rate has come up some on the exempt companies, but still much lower than your competing jurisdictions, which are on the 12%, which will be Ireland. When you look at the multinational sector is contributing to the reconstruction of Puerto Rico, as every other single sector, every single person, and every other single corporation has had to contribute to be able to deal with a very difficult situation. This gives you basically an accountability of the 36 control groups that operate currently in Puerto Rico. Their worldwide sales are $833 billion, of which $64 billion of that are in Puerto Rico. The net impact of this temporary excise tax on the multinational company has been significantly reduced by 2 items: by a federal credit that has been confirmed on recent guidance provided by the IRS, which the Secretary of Treasury will explain in further detail, and also by local credits that are being provided against the excise tax for creating investment, for maintaining employment, and for certain other activities. We're pleased to say that the excise tax estimate has been validated for this year at $1.4 billion, facilitating the implementation, the final implementation of the tax reform and of the fiscal reconstruction plan. So now, what is the next frontier? If you understand what are some of the dynamics of the economy, if you look at some of the sectors that have been the key sectors for the growth of Puerto Rico in the last 3 decades, and as you look at these new challenges, In every Star Trek trip, you want to know what the next frontier is. And the next frontier is a very strong private sector. These are basically some of the statements that were made at a joint commission of the Treasury Department with the tax reform by Douglas Holt-Eichen, which was a former CBO director. Basically, the growth is paramount for the economic recovery, as we all know. Puerto Rico has followed the right economic strategy. We have developed a tax policy that is pro-growth because it balances the source of growth between domestic products and the efforts of the large multinational companies. Research has shown that the fiscal consolidation is most successful when spending is cut, but also when you lower taxes. So that is the key for the next few years of Puerto Rico, being able to change that by a combination of two items, having been able by reduced spending and having a lower share by the government, and also having the possibility of the private sector coming in with lower taxes, which is basically money that is being distributed back to the pockets of corporations and individuals. The tax policy is also coupled with an energy reform. We have to be mindful about competition. I think the biggest challenge that we currently have is energy costs, especially with the soaring price of oil these days. Puerto Rico obviously has improved its value proposition just by the combination of these different initiatives. We're rebuilding the economic structure of Puerto Rico through several key reforms that we have been discussing with you and will be part of some of the other presentations. But I want to stress on one very important point and be able to share with you some very recent data so you see some of the progress and the underpinnings that have been occurring in the last year. As you all know, the joint efforts of the FDIC, the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Institutions, the Governor itself, and the Government Development Bank resulted in a successful, holistic, and simultaneous approach to be able to rescue the banking sector in Puerto Rico, with fortunately very minimal consequences, being able to do that simultaneously, basically a year ago, on April of 2010. We were able to recapitalize the banking sector with $5.2 billion in loss share agreements between the FDIC and the acquiring banks, and also with over $2 billion of combined capital that was raised. So basically a $7 billion recapitalization of the system. So what does this mean for the system? When you look back now a year after this has happened, let's look at some of the statistics and why these are important to the juncture where we currently at. Total banks have been reduced by a third. We had 9 banks, currently we have 6, so 3 banks have been reduced as part of the holistic approach. Branches have only been reduced by 11%, which I think it's an important item. Obviously, you always have redundancies, but we have only lost 54 branches. Most important, broker deposits, which were basically deposits that were purchased out of Puerto Rico, have been reduced by almost half. So the system has deleveraged by $10 billion on the liability side just by the reduction of broker deposits. Construction loans, which have been the most difficult asset, almost have been reduced also by 50%, $2.6 billion. Commercial loans have been reduced by 19% or $2.4 billion. Residential mortgages, fortunately, has only been reduced 4%, $739 million, and personal loans have been reduced by 18% or $361 million. What does this mean? It means that are the banks able or not to lend to be able to support growth? And I think this slide answers that question very categorically, and the answer is yes. When will that be? I mean, we're seeing already some of it, and we hope and are confident that the banks will continue to move forward in this process. But this stats stated very clearly. In terms of assets, there has been a deleveraging of 16% or $14 billion. And capital has remained stable at $6.8 billion. So basically the recapitalization was a key. The banks do have the capital. When you look at the ratio of total assets to basically capital, that ratio has gone up from 7.8% to 9%. And I think the important item to state is that that has happened while capital has remained stable at $6.8 billion. So what that basically means is that most of the write-downs that needed to occur in our banking sector has already occurred, and the banking sector is currently in a position to be able to support the growth that is very needed for Puerto Rico. Just some underpinnings which are also critical to the development of the Puerto Rico economy. Just recently, the Obama administration has taken a special interest by publishing these special reports of the task force. And there are, I think, two very important recognitions on the cover letter written by President Obama as part of this task force study. The first one is recognizing the importance of Puerto Rico in terms of their citizens, both that live in the island and also on the mainland. You're talking about almost 4 million Puerto Ricans living here, and almost that same amount in the U.S., which is recognized here. And the second part is the encouragement that the task force focus on economic and competitive issues. I will not go into all the details because the Secretary of Economic Development will go into them, but I think there are 4 things that are very important to mention which are part of this report. Providing Puerto Rico with economic empowerment zones, such as the one that other states have, which could be a second phase of development and a substitution to some of the activities that we used to have under former Section 936. Developing Puerto Rico as a model for clean energy, both in renewable energy projects, a Caribbean electrical grid, and also energy efficient. As we know, this is one of the critical items for the future. And also promoting Puerto Rico as an economic and tourism hub, as the gateway to the Caribbean has been a dream of many, especially on the financial side. Also, working with the airport, tourism, exports, and port. Many of these projects are critical projects on the P3 and also on the administration's agenda, and creating the Caribbean's Health Science and Research Center in Puerto Rico. When you look at all these, basically all the key reforms have been put in place, starting with the reconstruction fiscal plan that was executed, second with the public-private partnerships, then the permits reform, the energy reform that is ongoing, the health reform that is already benefiting more participants in Puerto Rico, and just recently in January, the tax reform. And we're pleased to say, as it was stated on April 2nd, just very recently, by one of our principal newspapers, that better times are ahead. And indeed, those better times are ahead. We have been positioned for sustainable economic growth. Where is this growth going to come from? And again, if you look at the next frontier is the private sector. Government reforms have taken down the principal barriers to growth, which I think is the key item. It's the philosophy of our governor and our administration. And the private sector must be that motor for job creation. And there are 4 specific initiatives that are being worked on the economic development side. First, emphasis on small and medium-sized businesses. We need to have a more robust commercial sector in Puerto Rico. We have the possibilities. We need to expand on the export initiatives. As you look or remember some of the initial graphs, when you look north, you have a picture. When you look to the sides and you look south, there are great possibilities for export. Creating opportunities on the health sciences, being able to benefit from knowledge transfer on the pharmaceutical side, on the medical devices side. Growth on the tourism side, which has been the focus. This is the reason why we're here in this hotel. The banking sector, the film industry, insurance, education, and obviously other sectors of the economy being these some of the principal. We have a strengthened banking sector and financial sector leading the way. So the growth is possible, the reform has been put in place. So finally, this is a great time not only to be in Puerto Rico, but also to invest in Puerto Rico. Thank you very much for this opportunity.